Welcome to this session on data use ecosystem tools and frameworks to promote evidence-based policies. Really glad to be here. This is towards the end of the World Data Forum, but what a great topic to talk about towards the end of the Data Forum. We've seen and hear in all the discussions so far, from whether we're discussing leave no one behind, or data inclusion, or value of data, financing, data governance, trust, open data, innovative approaches, you name it. And also discussions in hallways where partners are teaming up on new themes to work together. Data use is mentioned very often. So it's really on the agenda, and if not on the top, I would say on very high on the agenda. We even have amazing new job titles. One of the favorite job titles that I have heard is my dear friend, colleague Claudia Wells from Development Initiatives, whose title is Director of Data Use. So that really means that data use is very significant, an important area for us to focus on. But even as we see with COVID-19 and also the changing roles of national statistical offices and changing roles of all our organizations, including my small NGO organization, that it's a complex area. Data use, as important as it is also very complex, and a very complex area in the data value chain. But these conversations, show us that there's a lot of difficulties, also complexities in measuring this concept. And, there are lots of available proxies, but measuring data use has proven to be very difficult. So these two simple words, data use, but difficult to unpack and even more difficult to measure. In my group's work in ODW, we just recently did a stock taking of all the different measures, some 12 or so measures on development data effectiveness measures. And we see that many of these measures, actually miss or under measure data use. So that's an area where we all have to come together and work together. So the topic of today, the tools and frameworks, couldn't be more relevant. And also for us to come together as a community, as a group. And because this is a complicated and important area, it needs to be carefully thought through and nuanced discussions around it. So we hope today's session can be a starting point for these discussions on how to get from theoretical discussions and get to more data use to become operationalized and being practiced. We have a great panel that presents a wide range of perspective on data use. And what we would like to really highlight and see if we can get out of discussions is what are the different building blocks of an enabling environment for data use. We know a lot of different areas of building blocks. For example, data leadership, data stewardship, open data, effective digital data dissemination tools, linked to policy, among others. And we hope through our discussions and also contributions that we can dive in more into these components. So the format of the session is going to be three groups have brought this session together for you. So these three groups are very high on their agenda. So we'll have very fast lightning presentations, 2 minutes on each one of the recent work for each one of these groups. And then we're going to start up a very exciting panel moderated, and I will introduce that later. But let me introduce the three lightning speakers. And lightning, I mean really lightning. So guys, set your time clock and go fast. First, we're going to go with Francois Fontenot. He's the Deputy Head of Partnership in Statistics for 21st Century. We all know Paris 21. Then we go to Annie Milroy, who's the Senior Associate at Development Gateway. And finally to Lawrence Noe, who's the Research Manager at my beloved group, Open Data Watch. So Francois, over to you, and then you pass it on to your next speaker.
Thank you very much, Shaida, and I hope my connection is not too bad. I'm connected from the hotel, actually in Bern, but from my mobile because my OECD laptop is down. So technology failure. I'll be very quick, and just to say how excited we are in Paris 21 to have been preparing this together with you. Data use is really at the core of our mission in Paris 21. We do quite a lot of work on building skills for using data and producing data which users can eventually use. But I'll just give you two slides to quickly. The first one, which we are doing to actually document and talk when good data is used by good people. So some of you who are in Bern have seen this booth we have with your stories. We've put together these stories on how goals of good data use are visible. So the Data for Change campaign is on. Please share your stories on how data is used and the impact good use of data can have. So that was my first call, and we are very happy to help you craft these narratives. The second one is a bit more technical, and if you can show the next slide, this is numbers. You can see overall numbers going up. What we can see here is one of these measures which Shaida was referring to. We in Paris 21, together with many of our partners, measure how statistics are used in policy documents, in the media, in social media. What we see here is this machine, which has run on newspaper articles in 100 countries, in a lot of media. And what we can see is an upward trend, right? Look, whatever the region, there's more data which is used in the media. And that's good news. What you can see in blue is the amazing impact of the 19 story, which has brought data everywhere over the place. If you compare blue and green, green is newspaper articles in 2020 without COVID. It's still quite high. But I mean, you can clearly see data. So we have built this machine which puts a number on how data is used, how good data is used, both in the media, this example, in policy documents. And we've been engaging with many media people, many agencies. We're working with FAO on policies. We're working with UN Women on how gender data is actually used in national policies to try to put a number on how much of data is used and how we can understand de facto the new ways of using data. So these numbers are interesting. There's a lot of work on conceptualizing, understanding how data is used, just like the data production has been evolving big time. Policymakers in policy cycle steps have been evolving big time. And we have an exciting agenda, which I think many of you here are to my small 2 minutes. Over to you, next speaker.
Francois, your connection is really bad, but we would really love to have you back. Can you find a better connection and come back? Okay, next speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Francois, and thanks, Shaida. So I'm going to be talking about the disseminate program, which was led by Development Gateway and funded by MCC PEPFAR's Data Collaboratives for Local Impact. So within the DCDJ program, the 2323 mini project sought to determine whether trainings, placement of technical fellows, and improvement of data systems at the local level could lead to better data use within PEPFAR priority sites. But when we set out to monitor and evaluate data use at each health facility, we found that one, there's not a lot of existing frameworks or guidance out there for observing and measuring data use, especially in low resource areas. And two, resources in these health facilities varied drastically and ranged from rural community health outposts to urban university research hospitals. So we quickly realized that metrics of data use would not be one size fits all. So to address point one, we decided to develop a custom data use survey that asked facilities about 6 categories of data use behaviors. And to address point two, we borrowed data that PEPFAR had previously collected and categorized these health facilities in our sample according to their baseline capacity for data use, which depended on things like access to stable electricity and internet, access to computers and digital patient records, all of which varied from facility to facility. We then categorized intervention and control groups so that equal numbers of high, medium, and low data use capacity facilities were included in both control and intervention groups, with 23 facilities in each group. So this randomization within clusters allowed the DCDJ program to assess impact by comparing the data use scores of facilities, both in terms of baseline versus endline, but also in terms of intervention versus control. This method allowed our data fellows to identify and target data use solutions that met the specific needs of each health facility. Further, our analysis of survey results suggested a statistically significant increase in scores for data management, decision-making, and use of citizen-generated data. And the last slide, we have here some additional accomplishments from the DCDJ program.
Thanks, Annie. I'm going to be speaking briefly about the data use portfolio that we have at Open Data Watch. Next slide, please. So, as Shada has already mentioned, we've conducted a stock taking of 12 development data effectiveness measures, such as ODIN, Worldwide Governance Indicators, and the SPI that has also been featured throughout this World Data Forum. And on all 12 of these measures, we've sort of mapped them on the data value chain that many of you at this point are familiar with, and where, again, the idea behind this session is to move up the data value chain from production and collection of data towards data use and impact. And what we saw when we mapped these dimensions of the data value chain onto the indicators used in these various development data effectiveness measures, we saw that consistently data use and impact was captured the least in terms of the available information. And this goes back to the point that Shada was making about the difficulty in capturing this concept. And so this just again highlights from our work the necessity for further research and work to think through how to best go about capturing data use and think about the data use frameworks that we might use to understand this better. And here then we have also kind of ongoing work that we're doing through our open data inventory work, short ODIN, that we conduct every 2 years in over 180 countries around the world, where we assess countries' progress towards open data principles in publishing official statistics. And as part of that program, there's a lot of consultation with countries, including on the openness component, which has a lot of data use components, such as accessibility of data, and how data are displayed and disseminated via the websites of the National Statistical Offices. Third, we have an emerging work program on linking policies and data systems through our Bridging the Gap project, where we're making the link particularly between policy documents on gender equality and the data available to actually measure the progress through these policies. And we're kind of advocating for kind of a more virtuous cycle there between having the policies used by countries actually engender the demand for more of these data, and therefore kind of make them more sustainable use ecosystem. And then finally, as again alluded to by Shada, we're mapping out an enabling environment for data use together with our partners at SDS and Trends as part of the Avoiding Data Graveyards project, where we're again aiming to sort of demystify data use and kind of bring together these many disparate areas of work on official statistics and clarify what data use can be and where the leverage points are for improving data use. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, for sharing your work and being so disciplined in keeping up to the time. Now it's now for my privilege to introduce our moderator, who would in turn introduce our very distinguished panel for discussion today. Our moderator today is my dear friend and colleague, Agnieszka Rawa, and she's the managing director of the MCC PEPFAR, Data Collaboratives for Local Impact Initiative, and a great champion for more effective data partnerships and better data use. We are really delighted to have her and this amazing panel together. So I'm now turning to you, Agnieszka. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaida. And of course, thank you to Open Data Watch, to Development Gateway, and to Paris 21 for inviting me to be part of this wonderful discussion today. As Shaida mentioned, this panel really seeks to focus on the practical experiences on data use. What does it really look like? And so that's why I'm really excited to be speaking with three amazing guests from very different parts of the ecosystem who will try to relay and share with you some of their experiences. So first, Rachel Milicic, who joins us from New Zealand, from the future, literally, where she serves as Deputy Chief Executive at Stats New Zealand. Next, we also have Dr. Garb, who's currently the Chief Executive of Unique Identification Authority of India. And I should mention Dr. Garb has more than 30 years of experience in government at very different levels, and also a huge champion of data use, including some fascinating work developing a direct income transfer scheme for farmers. And Frida Gituku, who is joining us from Kenya. So look at this incredible spread. Frida is the Executive Director of Roots Kenya, a national movement of grassroots women and girls. So let's get started. And I'd like to turn to you, Rachel, first. Again, thank you for connecting from so late and so far, or so early in your day and so far. I really love the vision that appears on the Stats New Zealand site, and I think it's quite appropriate. It's to unleash the power of data to change lives. Can you please tell the audience a bit about how Stats New Zealand is really doing that?
So kia ora, everybody. As Agnieszka has said, I work at Stats New Zealand. I lead the Insights and Statistics group, and we're responsible for delivering our whole official statistics portfolio, apart from the census of population and dwellings. In terms of our work, we're New Zealand's official data and statistics agency. So as a National Statistics Office, we have that role, but we also have a broader role. And our Chief Executive, Mark Selden, is also the Government Chief Data Steward. So in the context of New Zealand, we're playing two roles, one through the government statistician and another broader role across government through the data steward role. We seek to provide independent, high quality information and insights about Aotearoa New Zealand and the lives of its people. We do provide this information to help government make more effective policy, make investment decisions, resourcing decisions across a number of dimensions. Interestingly, we've recently reviewed our strategy, and so we've actually changed from unleashing the power of data to change lives to being it's data for Aotearoa, about Aotearoa. So we very much see our role as serving New Zealanders, serving the country, and making that connection, putting data in the hands of our people in whichever context that is, whether that's government, whether that's iwi, the tribes of our Indigenous population Māori, or whether that's business. So that's a very big focus for us in terms of the work that we do. But as an introduction, that probably covers it.
That's wonderful. And I love also, to me, you're already pointing to something that's incredibly important, that that feedback loop is close enough to those that you serve that you've adjusted so quickly to the current needs and the focus. So thank you for presenting that, because that really is a high bar and I think a great framing for our discussion today. So I'm going to turn to Dr. Garg next. Many say that digital ID systems are the backbone of digitalization, and many of those more sophisticated data and digital, I guess, both services in e-government as well as protections. And so can you tell us how you are putting data to work?
Thank you. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here on this. The UIDAI is responsible for the digital identity for the country's residents. And as of now, we have issued to all 99% of the adults 1.3 billion digital identity we have issued. And it's given a nationally acceptable and a universally viable, verifiable identity for everyone. We have a means at the backbone, at the back end, that 24/7 anyone can verify their identity. And it's been empowering for especially the vulnerable sections, that they don't need to use any other means to say who they are, whether it's for a bank account, whether it's for any other benefit that they need to get. And it's also helped to transform the way programs are being implemented in terms of being able to transfer funds directly, because this identity, this digital identity, also acts as a financial address because it is linked to the bank accounts and it is also linked to the mobiles. So verification can be done through the mobile and funds can be transferred directly to the bank accounts. So because of this, I think where really the digital identity has helped is in terms of program implementation, and also in terms of when you have a lot of data, how to deduplicate that data about the residents so that there is no leakage of funds, and programs and schemes are much better targeted. So I think in all this, digital identity has really been, as I say, the digital infrastructure for doing a lot many other programs as we move ahead. Thank you.
That's really incredible, and congratulations for this accomplishment. I mean, 1.3 billion people, and so I'm really excited to hear more over the course of this conversation. Frida, I'd like to turn it over to you now. You are joining us, of course, from Kenya, where you're working at the grassroots level. Tell us your efforts and the perspective that you have then on what I think is kind of the ultimate participant in this data value chain, the individuals and citizens in the county level where you operate.
Thank you, Agnes. GROOT is a civil society organization and a network of grassroots groups. So basically what we do is drive demand for change and for accountability. We are doing a lot of advocacy, and specifically with an interest in women empowerment and gender equality. So data becomes very critical. It's a strategic asset for us to drive our work. And because we have this movement of people who double up as voters, but they are also really the right holders. They are the citizen that the government is serving or is supposed to serve. We take a very community-led and participatory approach to data. And for us, we've purposed to engage in the entire value chain, including the production, the analysis, the dissemination and use. So we are heavily invested in citizen-generated data. And of course, this is in acknowledging that in certain phenomenon that we want to bring change, data may be missing. There are data gaps, or if data is there, it's not gender disaggregated or disaggregated in a manner that we want it to be availed. So in that sense, we move in and we work together with this national movement of community groups to generate that data, of course, taking into account the issues of quality. We subject that data to feedback, validation, and criticism from the wider community. But most importantly is that we use that data for advocacy. And GROOT is an old organization, so for 26 years, we've created trust and relationship with different government agencies where decisions are made. Of course, the critical mass of people also helps a lot in terms of influencing, because at the end of the day, these people in government are politicians and they're interested in numbers. So when you have a critical number of people who are equipped with evidence and they want something to be done, they are more likely to be listened to. And again, it's good to acknowledge that we also live in an environment where public participation is encouraged by the Constitution. Whether it is flawed or not fully implemented, we are also capitalizing on that to do our advocacy. So at the subnational level, we've done quite a lot of work. We've generated data on gendered climate information services. How do women and men receive information on climate change differently? Because they do, they even prefer different methods of getting information to them. While some may want to get this information from radio and TV, the women prefer seminar and they find it more responsive to their need. So that kind of information need to be reflected in climate change policies, especially at this time when subnationals are domesticating the Climate Change Act. And in two of the subnational, we've been able to collect data also around the impact of climate change on household. And we use this data to interest the local government to initiate the process of formulating climate change policy, which for us, we think is a very positive outcome, because then you're improving the policy environment. The fact that the women play a significant role, the grassroots women, in terms of administering the questionnaires, it means we are also exposing them. So we are changing the profile of women, how women are perceived. We are dragging them into mainstream development. And we've seen, based on that interaction with stakeholders, with policymakers, with politicians, opportunities open up for them. We have a couple of them that now actually sit in the policy technical committees. They are expert based on the indigenous knowledge that they hold and the evidence that they've generated through this data collection process. We've seen several of them appointed in the Land Control Board. So you expand the opportunity for the women. We've also had one subnational called Nakuru County use the data that we've generated and actually quoted our dashboard for gender data in the development of its gender policy. So we see that this evidence generation, the engagement of a critical mass of community members, is helping improve the policy environment. Most importantly, because there are these spaces of public participation, what we often tell the women, don't go for public participation and just be present. Be there with a specific agenda that you want to push and have your facts and gender data right, because that's how people will listen to you. So of course, this is a process, the process of influencing the physical public finance management is an intense process, and you have to stay on it for a long time. But we've seen that when they are equipped with data and they follow up through the whole entire process or cycle, they are also able to influence budget. We saw one of the subnational where we were very keen on influencing the budget, allocate money for clean cooking for the first time, which is really significant. And we've also been able to interest other subnationals to put in county policies on energy. So that's all that we do with our data, is really to improve the policy environment.
Well, that is a ton that you're doing with it. And again, I'd like us to pause here briefly, because that really is the end goal, isn't it? Is to build that solid foundation. And this is what data democratization is. And what you're doing is empowering the citizens for whom we really are doing this to have a say in the matter. And the other thing that I find really interesting, Frida, is you're also a member of the Interagency Technical Committee on Gender Statistics with Kenya, Bureau of Statistics. And so you have this dual view of the ecosystem from the county level, but also from a different level, which is pretty interesting because it allows you to strengthen that connection between the ultimate end user, if you will, and the policies that are being made. So really fascinating work, and thank you for that great perspective. So let's build on this. And again, I'm going to encourage all of our panelists to dig into the practical and less into the generalities, because that's what we're trying to look at. I'm going to turn back to you, Dr. Garb. So you have built or are building this amazing national ID system for 1.3 billion citizens. What practical details can you share? How did you build that architecture? What would you highlight as being both the successes and some of the challenges you'd share with our audience today?
Yes, I think one of the main challenges, which was there maybe a decade back when we started off, is to get people interested in the digital ID and for them to volunteer and come forward to have this ID. And I think maybe the host of different systems that we had, which were operating in different regions, whether it's a driving license or it's a food card or it's a passport, etc. And the ability to replace all of them with just one ID, I think that caught the imagination, and that's what got implemented. The second thing I would say is that we operated on a public-private partnership model, that everything was not run by the government, but we had a host of agencies and operators at the ground level who actually acted as the interface with the residents to collect that data. And I think that was extremely important to ensure that the involvement and the work of a large number of agencies that helped. And I think the third point I would say is that we are using an open source architecture, and so that we are not tied to any particular vendor or software. We use open source software, open systems, and I think it goes very well with the open data, that concepts that you are talking about. And I think that was extremely critical. And I think all this has helped in a way to bridge the digital divide, so to say, that people are able to, are number one, aware of this digital identity. And through this digital identity, they are able to access various benefits and services. So I think even if, as an individual, they may not be having all the equipment or the systems, but because they are able to access it through third-party systems, I think it's helping to bridge the digital divide.
I think that's wonderful. And, there's another point here, which is that, again, in putting this data to use, of course, in the last year and a half, this ability to connect to the individuals that are potentially most vulnerable and make sure that they are not left behind in what has been a challenging global context is so important. So what an undertaking. But with all the eagerness that exists to put more data to work, when it comes to national ID, what people also are concerned with sometimes are the safety of the data. There's the trust element and cybersecurity. Can you just spend maybe a minute or 2 minutes on that?
Yeah, no, I think all our work, two things we are very they take precedence over everything else, and that's information security and privacy. So in fact, our system, the architecture is based on the core principles of minimal information, optimal ignorance, and a federated database. So UIDI as an organization keeps minimal data about any individual. And our Supreme Court has laid out the kind of framework under which we operate. So data privacy is something that is very extremely paramount in all our work. Our focus is, if I can put it that, on the ease of living for the most vulnerable people. so that this ID becomes the means of empowerment for women, for the vulnerable groups, or for them to be able to access the various benefits and services. And I can just mention that during the last 1 year, because of COVID, a lot of activities shifted to the digital fold, which were there on a physical format. And the use of the digital ID has multiplied manifold in the last 1 year because people wanted to access different services through the internet, through the digital means. And I think being able to authenticate and verify whether the person at the other end is the person that is being claimed through the use of the digital ID has really helped to transfer funds, benefits to migrant labor, to a host of other people living in remote areas, so that they don't suffer as much due to the COVID pandemic.
No, I think that's great. And I'm sure that, this is a trend that we're probably not going back on. So there's going to be more of an interest in doing that. And this both ability to connect to the citizens and also, as Rachel had mentioned at the beginning, be aware of what's going on so that at a policy level, there can be this evidence-based shift quickly. And trust, of course, which I'm hearing from both Frida and from you. And so turning again over to you, Frida, because again, ultimately, the SDGs and putting data to work, as I said earlier, seeks positive change amongst people, women, vulnerable groups, those where the gaps are still the biggest relative to the Global 2030 agenda. I was wondering if you can again take us to the even more concrete. Can you think of a story of a particular woman that you interacted with through groups, and what is possible when she accesses small data? Give us a sense of what is that data that she's accessing and how does her life change in that feedback loop process?
Yes, I think of a story of a lady. She's a grassroots woman from the Rift Valley part of Kenya. It's called Laikipia. She's known as Winrose Mwangi. She's one of super good grassroots data advocate. And one around when we were doing advocacy on the not more than two that gender principle in Kenya, they decided that they wanted to go out to measure the representation of women, not just in parliament and senate and county parliament, but in other decision-making spaces, where ideally these grassroots women would be occupying those positions, because they wanted to see how they are represented and why is it they are not really the one in water boards, agricultural committees, hospital boards and all that. So, and she has quite a strong community-based organization in the town where she's working, coordinating other groups. So we support them like we do in the designing the research question, developing the tools, of course, allocating some resources for the fieldwork and all that. And they actually realized that in the two major dominant water companies in their county, that they haven't met that rule. They do not have enough women representation in their board. And they decided to pursue that issue because it meant that then the women voices and the women perspective are not properly captured in the manner that people, water is supplied by this company, or just how household access water. And water is very close to the women agenda in the sense that they are the one, of course, fetching for it. They are using it at the domestic level. And so it's something that is very close. It's really a gender priority. So after a lot of advocacy with the Department of Water, of course, with the head of the company, where this lady who was the leader of that exercise got appointed into the board, which she served for 2 tenures. And she's very proud. She's now out of the board. She's served her tenure, but she's very proud that while she was the board of director, she was able to move that a lot of water to leaky. We call it leaky slums. And for her argument has been, I wanted the company to connect the people of Leaky with water and the surrounding areas, because that's where most of the single mother and female-headed households are concentrated. So these are people who have, concrete impact using data to change other people's lives.
Well, and Frida, what an inspiring story. And, you know, I think a key point here is it's not data for data's sake. It's people's lives and their problems, and using data to help get to the solution or to advocate for the solution. So I think that's wonderful. And thank you for sharing that.
Let me make a comment. And this work, because it's about generating evidence and influencing, it is not work that you do within a project. It is really beyond project. You do it for a long time, and you have to have a very long-term goal, and also the commitment in terms of time has to be longer.
Of course. Well, and many important things do. It really is data democratization, but I think that's a great point. It does take longer. It's not an intervention. And so, you know, even as we think of strengthening the data ecosystem, not only do we have to have a view of the different parts of the ecosystem, but to realize that that ecosystem will start working and the feedback loops will close if we sustain that effort. Okay, let's see. We need more practical examples or to continue, because these have been great. I'd like to turn it back over to you, Rachel. What practical steps does Stat New Zealand use to really share information that is tailored to the interests and needs and capacity of its users?
Sure. So it's actually, this conversation is really timely because, as I said, we have a new strategy. And so we've really been standing back and looking at what we need to measure. And one of our strategic priorities is to measure what matters. To understand what matters really means that we have to engage with our customers, with a range of audiences to, you know, to understand what that means. So in practical terms, you know, that is having a strategy, a customer strategy, a framework through which we think about our activities and, you know, the strategic engagement that we need to do alongside that. I mean, we've had various iterations of this over a number of years, but I think as this session is showing, we're moving from what have we published, what are we producing, to actually what is the impact, what is the difference that our work is making, and then thinking about what is the value and how do you measure the value. So I was quite heartened to hear that other people are really wrestling with how to measure value and use. Because it is so essential to, you know, to our work and to thinking about where we do have impact and making a difference. As part of that, understanding key needs, I think one point that's worth certainly thinking about is the difference between understanding our customers and understanding their patterns of use through digital technology. And those two things are very different. One talks about habits of people as they use our products, but actually understanding your customers, you know, goes beyond that. And so thinking about how do you form those relationships, whether they are strategic or whether they're, you know, someone who visits the website, what do we need to capture in order to serve their needs better? What sort of outreach do we have with communities where technology is not a big thing? How do we reach out through different mechanisms? Probably the second thing following on is really looking at our products and services and how people access what we have available. So we've been looking at the range of customer information that we have. We've created some personas. So that's identifying characteristics of the way that people use our products and then helping using those to help design the different features of the products that we have. We've also, depending on the significance of the changes that we make, in terms of how we engage. So one way that we can do that is to put out a proposal and obviously call for feedback. Go out to certain groups, policymakers, and get direct feedback. So our content for census will be a good example of that, where we've collected a range of views. We've taken those in, then we would publish our, our intention following that consultation. A second way that we look at our work now is where we might co-design with our customers, what's needed. So in that context, during COVID, we had to think about our household survey programming different. And so we added a supplement to our household labour force survey. And that was a wellbeing focused supplement. But in order to work out, well, what questions will we put in that, we engaged with policymakers quite closely in that development. And so what that meant was when we collected the data, we knew that it was going to provide new insights, certainly in terms of people's well-being, what the impact in the labour market, and that fed directly into the COVID response for the government, and in particular understanding what was happening in the labour market, which I know for many countries has been disrupted and certainly is not operating as it normally had. The third way is in terms of looking to others to provide a solution for our customers. So some work that we did with the tribes of our Indigenous Maori people, so iwi, we've collaborated in order to create a new app, which means that it was designed by iwi for iwi. And so very much what we've done is provide support, expertise to fill gaps, and that's twofold. One is providing data in a way that those communities, those tribes want to have that data, but also looking to build their capability in use of data, and that's been quite a feature of our work. And probably the last point is we recognise that even though we have independence as a National Statistical Office, we need to partner and collaborate and work with others. And sometimes that can create different tensions, but certainly for us, if we want to broaden the impact that we have with a diverse range of customers or citizens, we need to be working through others and with others. And so, as you can see in the examples I gave previously, those different mechanisms are the way that, we're thinking about our work differently, both within Stats NZ, but also, who we need to work with, whether that be data intermediaries. Some of those, many of those are non-profit data intermediaries in our context, whether that's the media and really thinking about how do we create news stories, and that's what we call them now. We create news stories and shaping those in a way that has impact and gets pick up with our local journalists. So there's just some of the ways and some of the practical ways I think that we're thinking about our work differently and looking to have impact.
Wonderful. Rachel, thank you for this treasure chest here of examples and specifics, and understanding the customers, the patterns of use. For our virtual audience today, I would encourage you all to look at Stats New Zealand's website, because there's this also part of it that focuses on the data portal. So there's information that these users can use and access, even information if you're starting a business to understand customers. So it really becomes a wonderful opportunity for that feedback loop to continue closing, and is a great model, I think. So let's shift gears here a little bit. I would like you all to think about the future. Next World Data Forum, or next 4 or 5 years. What are, and maybe don't, take a minute or two, because we're slowly reaching the last stretch of our session. But what would you see are some of the most important strategies to expand data use and really close that feedback loop to influence the decision making. Frida, maybe I'll, if you're able to, I don't know, Frida, if you're there, if you're able to go first. If not, we'll, Frida, are you there? Okay, I think you are. Yes.
Agnes, can you repeat the question?
Of course. So what I was saying is, if we look 5 years into the future or the next World Data Forum, what are the strategies that we need to employ? Where would you like data use? How would you apply strategies to expand data use from your perspective? So what's next?
Yeah, there are many things that I saw the question from Francois. There are many things that I think about in terms of increasing data use. One is that you can only use data if you have some level of capacity to understand it. So we need to think about capacity development for data users. And earlier today, I think when I spoke in plenary, I talked about the relationship that we have with the National Statistical Office, where they are able to train non-statisticians and data users on different aspects of data. I think that's one way of expanding use, because then people will have the ability and the interest to use it. We also have to avail data in platforms and in spaces and in formats that the audience are interested in interacting with. Some people want to find data in the media. Fine, we need to define which are these audiences so that we can have that data in the media. Others have the ability and the opportunity to go on dashboard and download those things for themselves. So the whole issue about accessibility and easily accessible materials, but also that are simple visualization that people can relate with, but also opening up the space. And this is a political action. Like, I tend to imagine in my country, the moment we finalize the guideline for citizen-generated data that is being worked on now, other data producers who double up as users, because most civil societies are both producers and users, they will feel more included in the sense that the data that they are producing is also making its way into the larger national data ecosystem. And the more people feel included, the more they will use this data, because they feel they are part of it, they have been part of the processing, and even what is coming from their side is being utilized. So that political action of opening up the space and finalizing those guidelines, whichever way they will look like, and I know it will be unique for every country, but bringing people inside the data ecosystem is what will encourage use. As long as people sit in the periphery and they are seen as others, data will be produced and we frown on it and move on.
Okay, so the future, or where you'd like to be, is again to support these users through some upskilling that is tailored to their specific needs. And I agree with you, like the more there's interest and the more people use data, the better the data gets, and it's again a self-fulfilling activity. So Rachel, switching over to you, what's in your 5-year strategy to again expand data use and influence for decision making?
I mean, in terms of our strategy, obviously working across the government data system, thinking about the health of that and how we work with, other government departments. Very much as part of that is capability building. And so I completely agree. That's certainly the feedback that we have as well. People need the capacity and the capability to be able to use data. So how do we actually support people to be able to do that? And certainly for us, that's working through others and with others on things like data literacy. I think the other thing for me is also governance. So, I mean, there's a very strong theme here of where decisions are made, who gets to make those decisions, the transparency of decisions around data. And I think that's just a theme that will grow, because it's critical to trust and confidence and participation. So I think that's certainly a considerable theme over the next 5 years. I think also, probably lastly, our digital infrastructure. So certainly, depending on the type of infrastructure that you have, that can create some disparities. I know even in the context of New Zealand, rural broadband is very different to urban broadband. And so you have to think about actually the digital infrastructure that you're working with and working towards. So they would be the key things, I think, for me.
Okay, that's wonderful. And so, Dr. Garg, maybe just with a little twist to your part of this question, but definitely feel free to talk about what future looks like in your space. But there are two questions, at least in the chat from the audience, about those safeguards on the use and minimal data collection. So feel free to just please weave that in, any advice specific to that and the building trust piece of it that Rachel also alluded to.
Yeah, I think if I was to, on the next 5 years and how we can increase the use of data, I think we have large amounts of data. Where we need to move ahead is on how to trust that data. What can be done to increase trust on that data, and that will automatically lead to a greater use of that data. And at a very broad level, there have been enough work done in the economic theory that as long as you build trust within societies, whether you call it social capital or trust, it leads directly to economic growth. So I think given the fact that we are moving increasingly into a digital economy, increasing trust in that data would help the digital economy and growth of the economy in general. Specifically, it would also help, for example, government services to move from an application-based system to an entitlement-based system, keeping in view the data that people are willing to share and use as a means of selection for data services for different government services. And I think within the government, our view is to move whatever is possible to the digital, or whatever can be, whatever service that the government can give, which moves to the digital system. And that presupposes that one has a large amounts of data available to be able to move to that level. And I think the issue of privacy and safeguards, that operates at different levels. That's why I would put them in two separate buckets. One is on information security, cyber security, so that anyone who is not authorized to have that data should not have that data. And that means a host of firewalls and different authentication mechanisms and gradations. And the second is on protecting the personal data, that whatever data exists, whoever has access to it, what are the protocols in terms of use of that data and in terms of access to that data. I think on both these things, there have to be strong internal protocols, strong internal watchdogs to take care of on both these issues. And I think for any government, they are paramount issues to ensure that the residents and the citizens feel safe in interacting with the government through the digital means, which automatically means a lot of data is getting shared.
That's wonderful, Dr. Garg. And again, I feel like time has flown, and we are unfortunately at the end of this panel, which I feel we could continue this conversation with your rich experiences at different parts of the ecosystem for a while. I just wanted to surface a few of the things that I heard that really I found quite insightful, even beginning from a quote at just the very start, that data is good when used by good people. I loved that. And then putting data in the hands of people, again, I think that's so important. Adjusting data use to this ease of living and surfacing, vulnerable individuals and women and communities. Of course, we've heard trust a lot. That's essential. And when individuals like the women that Frida described use data, they trust that data. And then if they get an outcome from that data, they feel empowered to do more with the next set of data. And then, of course, I really loved this, that the NSO should leave no one to sit on the periphery. I think this is something that Frida said, but I'm sure Rachel will agree with, because she's putting that very principle to action. So again, I wanted to thank everyone who joined us today for listening. I hope that you enjoyed hearing from Rachel, Dr. Gard, and Frida as much as I did. And again, the real work now continues to be to put more data to use. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the World Data Forum. Farewell. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.